Welcome to the Research Like a Pro question and answer series. And today we're talking about creating a research plan with the fans. So the question that came up was, how do I create a research plan using the friends and family, associates and neighbors, or better known as the fans in our genealogy world of my research subject? So if you're not familiar with this term fans, this is coined by Elizabeth Shown Mills. She uses a lot of cluster research where we are reaching out and gathering the people that are associated with our research subject, especially when we hit a brick wall and we are stuck. We don't know what else to do. Then we have all of these people that we can investigate and see if some of them can help us learn more about our research subject. So this is a great methodology, and you might want to incorporate this into your research plan or just into your project phases. So let's just review what research planning is all about. What are the steps to doing a research plan? Well, we always have to start with an objective. That is the thing that focuses our project. It lets us know where we're going, and we try to narrow that down a bit. So if we're doing the fans, we obviously cannot explore every single fan. We'll have to think about that. After we create a good objective, we go through and we have done our timeline step in the process. So once we get to research planning, then we create this summary of known facts. We go back to our timeline and we really select the most relevant pieces to the objective. And then, based on what we know and our objective, we can create a hypothesis. What we think happened, what we think our research will show, kind of our intuition, whatever it's telling us, what we want to test, what we want to try to prove, are all ideas for hypothesis. Then we look at our locality guide and we try to choose a bunch of different sources that might help us with this objective. And then from those, we prioritize. So that's the basic way we do a research plan. Now let's think about how to do this with the fans. So first of all, with the research objective, one of the things we need to do is actually identify all the fans, and a good chance that we have for doing this is during the timeline phase. So as you're going back and looking at every record that you have gathered together, or maybe it's in your tree or other people have in their trees, make sure you are getting those fans down. And if you're using the Airtable Research Log base, then there is a special field just for fans. If you're using a spreadsheet, you can have a column for fans. If you're using a document table, you could just note the fans in the table. You could simply write a list of them, but make sure you're identifying them. And the types of fans that you'll want to look at perhaps would be neighbors on the census, anybody who is a witness in the probate or an executor or an administrator, anybody involved in probate. In the vital records, maybe you've got sponsors, you've got witnesses, you've got different people named in the record. In a land record, you could have the person who is purchasing or selling the land, witnesses, anybody named in the land record. So there are a lot of different places where we will find the fans, all those people associated with our research subject. Not just these records, but every record you look at, you should be seeking to identify a fan. So when we're thinking about our objective, after you have done this timeline phase, hopefully you will start noticing one or two or maybe even more people who seem like they could be more important to the research subject than others. So sometimes you'll see fans and they are perhaps witnessing all of the land records, and maybe they are a county clerk or they're working there in the office or who knows what, but they seem to be the witness for everything. Well, they perhaps wouldn't be as important to your research subject as someone maybe with the same surname, who could be a brother or an uncle or even a father or a son. So you'll have to look at your fans list and really think about who are the important people. Now, once you have identified them, you could create a special objective based more on learning about them. So you might have an objective that you want to identify a certain individual, but as you look through your timeline and your summary of known facts, you're realizing that the best way to learn more about your research subject would be to learn more about the people associated with them. So there are a lot of different objectives that can come about with the fans. You could also just do a complete project on one or more of the fans if they seem especially important, especially if you suspect that they might be related in an important way to your research subject. When you're doing your summary of known facts, you could just include a column for the fans, much like your research, like the timeline in your research log. And so you could just have a column and you could name the fan and you would have the source citation. And then if you have any thoughts about who this person could be, you could make some notes about that. Say you've got someone with the same surname and it just seems like perhaps this was a brother or an uncle. You could make some notes about that. So you could include those fans in the summary of known facts. And then you're going to create a hypothesis and you're going to try to think about what that connection could be. Some of the clues you might be looking for: the same surname as the research subject. And then think about the types of records the fan is appearing in. The more experience you get with the records, the more you understand the importance of a name appearing. So, for example, if you're doing Irish research and you are looking at a baptismal record for a Catholic parish, you'll see sponsors. And you'll realize, because of your experience or your knowledge about those records, that the sponsors are usually family members, are usually people who are close to the research subject. And so as you learn more about the records and why people might be appearing in them, it'll help you to start getting some clues and some understanding about your fans. You'll also want to take note if there are any clues to age, their residence, anything you can see in the records. Sometimes a person will have John Smith of Greene County, and you'll get some clues about where they are living or where they are residing at the time of that record. And you might also get some clues about how old they are, which could help you to identify them. So often we look for all these clues for our research subject, but we don't think to actually look for clues for these fans as well. So our hypothesis could help us to expand and think a little bit more about these people that are associated with our person. And then you really will benefit from learning more about the time, locality, and customs, and really thinking about what is the most likely reason that fan is listed. If you're looking at something like a census record and you're tracking the people before or after your research subject, you might want to think, well, why would these people all be living in the same neighborhood? Are they related in some way? Are they all farmers? Are they all city people? Is there anything that connects these people? You could look at where people are born. Are they all born in North Carolina and now they're out in Missouri? Were they all of a similar age? You can start thinking about community. Now, after you have a hypothesis about these fans that you've selected that you want to study, then you are going to identify your sources. And this will all go back to that hypothesis about what kind of records could help reach the objective. And every project will be different, every location, every time period will be different, but you'll want to get a nice, robust list of sources that you think could help you as you're doing your research. And then from that nice, robust list, you're going to prioritize. So, some of the things we think about when we're doing a prioritized list: how available are those records? How much time is it going to take to search them? Are you going to be browsing, 500 pages, or is there an index at the beginning that would help you? And how likely is it, if you find information in that source, to get you closer to your objective? So we think about those things and then we strategize and try to find a nice order of priority of those about 5 strategies. So let me give you an example of how I used fans in one of my late latest research project, so this was for my Clemsy Cline project, I had an overall objective to find the father of Clemsy Cline, who was born about 1817 in Alabama and died after 1880 in Wise County, Texas. So, the very first project I did, I felt the need to go back and really document Clemsy's life. I needed to find at least a candidate, somebody who could be a father for her. So the first project really was all about trying to figure out where she and her husband, Henderson Weatherford, lived and if there were any Kleins around the area and trying to find some candidates. So I did find some Kleins. I found some fans of Clemsy, and I only chose them because they had the same surname of Klein. And you may think, well, there may be a lot of people of Kleins, and there actually weren't in this area in Arkansas. There were just these people. And so I decided that I would do a complete research project to explore them and learn about them. Now, the tricky thing about this locality, Izard County, Arkansas, is that it is a burned county. The courthouse burned in the 1870s during Reconstruction, or I think it burned in the Civil War and then again in Reconstruction anyway. All these records that would have been so helpful for this project were lost, except for federal land patents, which were a different jurisdiction, and the tax records, which had been sent to the state. So I had a pretty limited group of records, but these people had all patented land. And I thought, let's see if we can find out any more about them from the available records and see if I can find any connections at all to Clemsy. So the objective for this phase 2 reads, this research phase will seek to identify the Cline associates of Clemsy Cline in Izard County, Arkansas, who patented land there between 1844 and 1850. And then I give the key identifiers for Clemsy with her birth and her marriage. And I also noted that Henderson paid taxes in Izard, and that's why I'm looking in Izard because this is the earliest known record for the couple. There's no marriage record for them, but their first daughter was born about 1839, 1840, and of course I can't find them in the 1840 census, so I'm looking at these taxes and thinking, let's look at Kleins in this area. And then these three, John Mahaley and John C., all had a land patent. They're in Izard County. And looking at their land patents, they were all fairly close. And I don't have a location. The taxes didn't reveal any location, the tax record. So there's my project. Now that might seem kind of wide and broad, but we're talking burned counties and a female, and we have to expand out to these friends, associates, and neighbors. And I am just guessing that these could be family. So when I did the summary of known facts in the first project, I had tracked the land and taxes. I pulled out as much information as I thought I could find. But you will notice that in that first project, I just used a book for the tax records. This Desmond Walls Allen had done a great book. And so I basically was just using that. And I decided that, for this next project, I was going to get original records because I had just been using some derivative records. So I did do my summary of known facts for each Klein fan. So I had John C. and I had Mahala. And then I also have John Klein Jr., and he is not pictured here, but I have a table, similar table for him. And really confusing was just tracking all the different land. And so you'll see I added some color coding just to help me get my mind around that. So I did have a working hypothesis based on what I had discovered so far about these people in phase 1. And we have the censuses for them, another federal record type. So I had learned that John C. Klein was born about 1785 in Pennsylvania. And just based on his name of Klein, which seems very German, knowing that Pennsylvania was a source of immigration for many Germans, I just hypothesized that he was likely a son of German immigrants. He migrated first to Virginia, where Jacob Klein was born about 1811. This is another fan that I haven't talked about that I had also explored in phase 1. He then moved south to Georgia, perhaps marrying again, then on to Alabama by 1817, where Clemsy was born and Mahala was born in 1828. John Cline moved again, this time to the hilly, rocky Ozarks of Izard County, Arkansas. While there, Clemsy met and married Henderson Weatherford about 1838. He had moved to Izard County with his father, William, and brothers, and Henderson was taxed in Izard County, then moved to Morgan County, Missouri. So some of these things I have proven, other things are a hypothesis. It's my best guess of what I think was going on with this family. Also residing in Izard County, Arkansas, were two more Clines, Mahala and John Cline, who patented land in the same general vicinity as John C. Cline. They were likely his children and possibly Clemsy's siblings. So this really helped me to expand my mind and my thinking about what was going on with this family. I basically had to make up a story about the Clines based on the records and the inferences I was making from these records. Now, why would I do that to make up a type of a story? Well, it helps me think of records. And maybe it's not the way everyone does it, but it really helps me to think about what I can investigate as far as records. So I did have a locality guide and I did a pretty robust list. Here's just a little section of it. You'll see that one of the things I really wanted to get was going to the original tax records because they just had that derivative. And then I also wanted to go to the tract books for those federal land patents. I had ordered the original land application files. And so I wanted to see if the tract books had any more information. I was basically taking every source that I had, which was tax and land, and trying to extract as much as possible from it. So I ended up with my prioritized research strategy using the records for Izard and Fulton counties. I had found that John C. Cline had lived in Fulton because Izard was split and became Fulton and he lived there during that time. But of course, the records there were also burned, and so I had two burned counties. And in both, I did have the tax records and land tract books. So I went to what I had and did as much as I could to research to find them. So, what did I find? Well, the tax records turned out to be a huge boon. The tax records had the actual land description. So, correlating that with the land description in all the land records, I was able to separate out those John Clines, which was which. And I also found that John Cline Jr. died before John Cline Sr. and found his probable widow and found a reason for why the family left Arkansas and went to Missouri. And just for a final fun thing, I did a DNA project next and found that indeed I did have DNA matches through those clines of Izard County, and turned out they are biological family to Clemsy, and Mahala was her sister, and it looks like John was her brother. So I started with something where I thought I could never figure it out with Clemsy Cline, but expanding to those fans, those probable family members, I was able to prove a family and find her family. So, what happens if you follow your research plan and you're working with your fans and you've correlated the evidence, you've written the report, and you still don't feel like you know enough or you're not quite there? Well, you continue with additional phases. So, in my phase one of the Klein project, I had identified some possible fans, but I didn't know enough about them. In phase two, I really learned a lot more and solidified my thinking about how they were connected. And then in phase three, I added the DNA, which gave me the proof, the evidence that I needed to say, yes, this is in truth Clemsy's family. So you may be spending many additional phases on your project if you have many fans and you feel like you are swirling around trying to figure out your person of interest. But if you break it apart, do it in phases, just investigate one or two fans at a time, then eventually you will get to the point where you will feel confident in your conclusion. So good luck with your fan research and planning for that. Fans aren't just something to do when you think you might want them. You need to actually plan how to use them and do complete projects, who complete research plans for them. Thank you.